right. Well, today we're going to continue our discussion of Christianity in America. Talking about Christianity in the New Republic and talking about religious liberty. Now, the issue of religious liberty is related to American independence, but it is not necessarily equal to. So we will be talking about the war for American independence. We'll be talking about that as a background to religious liberty. But there are other issues related to religious liberty that are that will be in the forefront of our discussion today. The background is the efforts of the residents of the colonies to secure both religious and political freedom, because there's still the issue of the established church in the colonies. We talked about this last week. What denomination was established in the New England area, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony? Yes, the Congregationalists. All right, so that faith is noted for its Calvinism, its church discipline, its a baptism of infants, and the union of church and state. It was their desire that they would be a city upon a hill, a place where God's laws would be enacted on earth, so that this would be a community that could be lifted up and held up as an example to the rest of the world. Did it work out that way? Well, not quite, because with the practice of infant baptism, we had people on the rolls of the church that grew up without making a profession of faith, without having a genuine conversion experience, and yet holding membership in the church and citizenship in the community. And so we ended up with an unregenerate community, because of the halfway covenant, and really diluting the revival that the Congregationalist forefathers expected. So, what happened? The Great Awakening. All right, the first Great Awakening came because of this general spiritual malaise that fell over New England during the 1700s. This period of time after the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. All right, that's up in the north. All right, in the south, particularly in Virginia. What was the denomination that was established? The Anglican Church. Yes, the Church of England had strong roots in Virginia, so that the Anglican Church was the established church. And the taxes, there were taxes in Virginia that were used to support the Church of England and the salaries for the Anglican pastors. So in these areas in particular, there were efforts to secure religious freedom, while at the same time they were also seeking political freedom from England. Well, Dissenters still dominate in British North America. So it is a historical fact that whenever there is union of church and state and an attempt to suppress dissent, it does not work. There are always those who dissent. There are always those who demand freedom of conscience, because that is the way God made us. Faith that is coerced is not faith. And so we have dissenters that are trying to create an alternative society, alternative to the union of church and state. Well, here's the problem with the Church of England. First of all, they'd had the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel had success enough that that there were enough Anglicans in the colonies that there was a desire to establish an American bishop. Let's place a bishop in the colonies. Well, there was fear of this. The Dissenters did not want an Anglican bishop to come from England for a number of reasons. Remember that King James said that no bishop, no king, saying that recognizing that the monarchy was dependent upon the support of the Anglican bishops. And so those who wanted freedom from England did not want the bishop there to encourage obedience and allegiance to the king. Also, they don't want the Anglican Church with a strong representative like the bishop continuing or increasing the suppression of dissent. And then as well, there were the Anglicans themselves, that is to say, those who were of the wealthy nobility who were accustomed to taking leadership in the Church of England, and they didn't want a bishop either. So we had dissenters and Anglican laymen who do not want to lose power. And so they're actually uniting with the dissenting colonists, that is the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, and the Quakers, in opposition to an Anglican bishop. Well, we have then these different denominations aligning one way or the other in relationship to the American independence. Those who were loyal were, of course, the clergy of the Church of England. The revolutionaries, generally speaking, came out of the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists, Baptists, Catholics, and Jews, and not that there were that many of them at this point, but nonetheless those who were there favored independence from England. And then the Anglican laity, particularly those who were wealthy and, as I said, were opposed to having the power of an Anglican bishop. Those who were mixed were the Wesleyans, that is the Methodists, those who were the Reformed Dutch, the Lutherans. They did not have a denominational stand, and so there were those for and against independence. And then there were the pacifists, the Mennonites, the Moravians, and the Quakers, who were opposed, not so much opposed to independence as they were opposed to war. And then there was the influence of Deism, which was popular among a minority of the upper class. Now, we did not talk much about Deism in this unit, but because there's a section on that in the lecture on the Age of Enlightenment. But I do want to at least talk a little bit about Deism and define it for you. First of all, as you look through your lecture on the Age of Enlightenment, you're going to see that there are essentially 5 different philosophies, and each one has a key word. Okay? All right? I'm sure you've looked at that. Okay? If you haven't, I'm sure that you will look at that before you take the exam. Okay? But for Deism, the key word is impersonal God. And that really does kind of capture the idea of a deist, because a deist believes in God, but he does not believe in a personal God. Certainly does not believe that God became incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ, nor would he believe that God would come to humanity in the form of flesh to redeem humanity to himself. A deist believes in a God who is impersonal, who is abstract, who is distant. a deist would see God, you've probably heard this illustration before, as a divine watchmaker. The idea that a watchmaker puts together a watch, winds it up, starts it to running, and then sets it aside, and the watch is no longer in need of the watchmaker. Okay? Now this works better if it's like a solar-powered battery running the watch. But you get the idea that the watch continues to run separate from the watchmaker. That is their understanding of creation, that God created the earth and humanity, set it into operation, but no longer interacts with it in a personal way. Deism is one of its features is a desire to overcome the divisions within Christianity by affirming a small core of commonly held Christian beliefs, and is opposed to the narrow dogmatism of Christianity. Deism is the opinion of those that only acknowledge one God without the reception of any revealed religion, and who reject Christ and his teaching. All right, so a deist accepts the existence of one God, but denies revealed religion, that is, the authority of the Scriptures, and also denies the divinity of Jesus Christ. One of the interesting aspects of deism is that even though they did not believe in Jesus as fully divine, they did appreciate his moral teachings, and they did appreciate Christianity and its influence on society, because they wanted a well-ordered, moral society, and they recognized that Christianity had a positive influence on that. So they affirmed Christian teachings without affirming Jesus Christ. This is why Ben Franklin would be such a supporter of George Whitefield. As we discussed last week, he actually financially supported George Whitefield and encouraged his ministry because he liked the results of Whitefield's preaching, even though he didn't agree with the subject of Whitefield's preaching. There are 5 doctrines of deism. God exists. God is to be worshipped. Practice of virtue is the true worship of God. People must repent, and there are future rewards and punishments. Okay? And then noted, and there's also a 6th doctrine, belief in God as a governing and overruling providence who guides and determines the destinies of nations. So you can see how a deist in America would see the things that are going on in America as evidence of providence and a certain design for the colonies, for the continent, for the coming nation. We're going to see this as it's worked out through civil religion and many of the issues are going to develop through this period of time and then on into the Great Awakenings. Noted American deists include George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is often quoted, and you can find many of his statements that talk about God, or even talk about Jesus, or even talk about his teachings and the importance of Christianity in America. Thomas Jefferson is noted for being a biblical scholar and for translating the Bible, at least the New Testament. So that really seems to affirm Jefferson as a Christian. However, when you look at his New Testament, and especially the Gospels, you see that he has edited out any of Jesus' miracles or any reference to Jesus' divinity. So we see that Thomas Jefferson really fits into well into the parameters of deism. Thomas Paine said, "I believe in one God and no more." Yes, Jeff?
In your slide on deism, you mentioned that George Washington was a deist as well.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard that much about him, actually. I've heard that about the others, but could you elaborate on that?
Yes, what was George Washington's faith? And I think that of these that I've listed, there's been quite a bit of controversy over his faith. In my Baptist Heritage slides, as we're talking about some of the missionaries and evangelists in New York, I mentioned John Gano, well known as a revivalist and evangelist in that area. John Gano's son claims that his father baptized George Washington. Okay? Now, there's no, as far as I know, there's no evidence outside of this statement by Gano's son, but nonetheless, that is, I would consider that a fairly reliable source. I think that there are those who have quoted George Washington to the extent that it makes him appear that he either was maybe had at least talked more about Jesus as an elevated Jesus, the person of Jesus, more than typically would be done by a deist. But at the same time, politicians have always, played the God card, and so I really can't answer that much whether George Washington was a deist or perhaps was a Christian.
And not to get too far off, but was George Washington a politician?
Was he president?
Yes. Or was he a politician?
What do you think, Jeff? You've obviously done some research into this or reading or something. Give us your opinions on George Washington.
I'm sorry. I didn't think he was really a politician because he took it reluctantly. And I know he kind of took it. People can say, oh no, he wanted it, but the fact that he could have been president the rest of his life and gave it up, to me, that's not. I can't say one politician, one president in the 20th century that would have done that. And so, I don't know. And so because of that, I tend to place more weight on his statements about Christ. And I've heard some, I couldn't quote him the name here, but I've heard some, everything I heard seemed pretty Christian. So I was like,
I've read those as well, and I certainly don't want to malign George Washington by any means, any more than I would, Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. I guess the point is that regardless of George Washington's individual relationship to deism or Anglicanism, I'm sure he held membership in the Church of England in Virginia. I guess the serious point is that deism was strong among those who are considered leaders in America. So we'll just have to leave the question of George Washington's individual faith to another opportunity, more focused research.
sorry.
Okay, sorry. Well, that's all right. It's just it's a good question. Thomas?
I was just wondering about maybe some influence of the Masons and Deism.
All right, what's the connection of Masons and deism? That sounds like a great research project, and if you hadn't already chosen your topic, I would assign that to you, Thomas. This actually, I've actually considered putting the Masons as a topic for someone's research paper, because I would like for someone to do some more research on that. But at any rate, I'm not prepared to talk about Masons and deists, but the Masons and their connection to the founding of America is certainly fascinating, as anyone who's watched National Treasure can attest. All right. Anybody want to say anything else about Masons? In fact, Thomas, did you want to say something about Masons?
No,
Okay.
I was just wondering if there was some connection. I've not seen that.
Oh, seriously? Well, it certainly would be interesting. Based on National Treasure, the Masons had a connection to everything. All right. Well, the point here is that is that as deism became popular among a minority of the upper class, they joined forces with traditional Christians in a fight for liberty, which makes for interesting bedfellows. Right? Deists and Christians joining together. There was religious freedom in some of the colonies. We already know about Rhode Island, and then the middle colonies, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, enjoyed religious freedom, and we'll find out more about that in just a minute.
Yes. I just had a question about deism real quick. I know they said that one of the doctrines is to worship God. How did they do that compared to like Anglican church and stuff like that? Would they go to church and just sing and edit Jesus' name out of it? And I mean, how did they worship or how would they worship God in their sense?
Yeah. Well, they would. I'm sure that most of them attended church. At least in New England, they would attend the Congregationalist church. In Virginia and other areas of the South, they attend the Church of England. They worshipped God. They recognized that there is a Creator God, but they would not worship Jesus Christ or the Holy Spirit. They just did not recognize the Trinity. They recognized the one God. And so insofar as they could worship God, they did. I would expect that they attended church. For one thing, there were Sabbath laws enacted wherever there was a church established, so they would attend church. Again, because so much of their work depended upon public support, they certainly would attend church, and many of them recognized the influence of Christianity on society, and they recognized truths and moral teachings from the Bible. That's why we see so much of their writings full of references to Scripture. Okay? Yes, Joey?
Right. Just curious. I'm assuming they would take out the miracles in the Old Testament too.
Yes.
So
But of course, when I talk about Thomas Jefferson, he only worked with the New Testament, and so that's why I say that he took out Jesus' miracles. They may have completely set aside the Old Testament. So, well, we need to have an entire lecture just on deism. But I appreciate your interest in it. I think it is certainly a significant movement, even though it began in England. It did have tremendous influence here in America. Okay. All right. Now, up in New England, we have the persecution of New Light Dissenters. Does anyone remember what is meant by the term New Light?
Is that the new movement, the revivalism and stuff like that, where the old lights?
Right. Remember Charles Chauncey, the old brick? He represents the old lights. He was opposed to revivalism because he was opposed to the enthusiasm and the emotionalism of revival. New lights then became more interested in revivalism and enthusiasm, and so they're going to essentially be working outside of the established church, and therefore they're persecuted. They're limited by Congregationalist churches. We have Congregationalism established in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, and those dissenters who live in those colonies are forced to pay taxes that support the Congregationalist church, and if they do not pay taxes, then they're threatened with confiscation of their property. Anglican churches are established in a number of states, but really only enforced in Virginia. but there are arrests and imprisonments for unlicensed preaching. So if you're preaching according to any dissenting faith outside of the Church of England, such as Baptists, you're threatened with arrests and imprisonments. All right, we're going to look at how Baptists organized for liberty in the North. Now, again, we're in history of Christianity in America, and here I am focusing on Baptists, but there's two reasons for that. Number one, that's my strongest understanding of American Christianity, and it is our faith tradition, or at least in general. It is the faith tradition of those in this classroom. The Warren Association was one of the early Baptist associations developed in 1767, and it included churches in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Isaac Backus was one of the leaders of the Warren Association, and he was a New Life Congregationalist who actually transferred his entire congregation to Baptist. So his Congregationalist church became a Baptist church. 1769, the Warren Association formed the Grievance Committee and made him the chairperson. And during this time, the Congregationalists, let me back up. During this time, Backus's mother refused to pay the tax to support the Congregationalist church. And so the colony in Massachusetts sent soldiers to her house to arrest her at night in the cold when she was huddled ill in her blanket while she was reading the scriptures. These soldiers came and arrested Isaac Backus's poor little old mother. Well, this is a public relations disaster for Massachusetts, and her son Isaac milked it for all it was worth in promoting religious liberty, as opposed to this established church that would threaten a sweet little old lady. In 1770, they threatened to appeal to London, which put pressure on the colonial authorities. Remember that the monarch in England had given to the Massachusetts Bay Colony a charter that guaranteed their independence from England. But if the Massachusetts Bay Colony were seen to be persecuting its citizens, well, then that charter could be revoked. Then they decided to follow a pattern of civil disobedience. They decided they would stop paying the church taxes. Well, they really were able to call the bluff of the authorities because they were not inclined to contest resistance. And the Baptists were so numerous that their support for the impending war was necessary. They attempted to put together a Massachusetts Constitution that did not address religious liberty. Backus responded with a treatise, Government and Liberty, and said that the Revolutionary War was fought for both political and religious liberty. And the motto for the struggle for independence was no taxation without representation. Backus said, well, that's how the Baptists feel. You are taxing us for churches that we do not attend, and therefore we're being taxed without representation. And so this was a very cogent argument against what the established church was doing. In 1778, the proposed Constitution failed. And then they tried again in 1779. They passed it with limited religious freedom. They still taxed all the citizens for the support of churches, but they allowed the citizens then to designate their taxes towards specific Protestant ministers. So this allowed Congregationalists to be supported, or Baptists to be supported, or other denominations. But Backus said no, the civil magistrate should not have any authority in religious matters, that even with a general tax supporting the church, that's too much involvement of the state in the church. So Backus was opposed to this tax. Said that God is the one lawgiver and people cannot usurp his authority. All right, so we're going to move from the north to the middle colonies. Oh, yes, Thomas?
The taxation, was that above their time, or was that?
Well, for many of them, yes, it was above their time. For many of them, they chose to support their church through the tax, and so then they did not give their tithe directly to the church. But this, of course, is a violation of the scriptural principle, and so that was part of Backus's objection to having the churches supported by a tax instead of by tithes and offerings. Okay. Well, in the middle colonies, they enjoyed religious toleration. Remember Pennsylvania, settled by the Quaker William Penn. So William Penn established a charter that guaranteed religious toleration for all who came there. And we talked about how that made Baptists a significant group within Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania then became a haven for dissenters, and so there was quite a bit of religious pluralism in these colonies. That also made it good for the economy, because people came to these middle colonies to live, attracted by religious toleration. So that was good for the economy there. But Baptists benefited because of the atmosphere where they could develop a model for others, and middle colonies became a haven for persecuted Baptists. But then when we keep moving south, we encounter the struggle for religious liberty in the South. And there, of course, we're dealing with the Church of England. There were strict laws demanding conformity to the Church of England, taxation in support of the Church of England. Baptists were fined and imprisoned for preaching. So, when they got into jail, what did they do? Kept on preaching. And so they found that even though the Baptists were jailed, they still preached and won many converts, like Paul and Silas. All right? The Church of England would not recognize marriages performed by Baptists. So you can imagine the havoc this would wreak on a marriage, because without a legally sanctioned marriage, then you do not have legal children. You've got problems with inheritance. And so it almost forced some couples to go to the Church of England, and there the Anglican ministers would charge high fees, and then they would try to proselyte these young couples, and so we have some problems there. They did get an ally from Patrick Henry, who said to Baptists, ignore the law and fill the country with Baptists. So go ahead and get married and have lots of children, raise them as Baptists, and change the laws. John Leland became the primary Baptist spokesman in the South for religious liberty. All right, we have Isaac Backus in the north, John Leland in the south. He's considered a moderate Calvinist, and I like this quote: "The best theology has enough Calvinism to believe man is lost, and enough Arminianism to believe that he could be saved." Okay, that's a pretty modified Calvinist statement. He wrote, "The rights of conscience inalienable, saying that the rights of conscience are not subject to governmental restriction or permission. All right, again, faith cannot be coerced. And the establishment of religion always damages religion. And I think that we can see that when the Constitution was passed and put into effect, and we have the separation of church and state, we no longer have established religion in America. When we see true religious toleration, true religious liberty for all faiths, then we have genuine, vibrant faith, rather than the faith that was coerced by the establishment of the church. He said the real motives of establishment are to supply the purses of ministers. So obviously the ministers are going to have regular salaries supported by taxation, and it also gives more power to the civil authorities because they can rule through the church. In the South, there was a general assessment bill, which was considered to be a compromise. Again, just like in New England, decided that they would collect taxes from all to support designated denominations. But again, Baptists opposed this. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson supported this position and established instead the bill for establishing religious freedom. And this was a bill that did bring about religious freedom in Virginia and disestablished the Church of England in Virginia. So no longer would it be supported by taxation. And this separation of church and state in Virginia set the precedent for the federal government. Now I wanted to say a word here before we get into talking about the federal Constitution. Wanted to talk about American preaching before and during the American Revolution. What was it? What were the preachers? How were they preaching in relation to American independence? This is a topic that's listed as an option. I'm thinking on it here, but I have had students who have done research into this topic on American preaching during this time. Here's just an example. This is a sermon by Jonathan Mayhew. It was preached around 1760. It was preached on the anniversary of the execution of Charles I. So you'll remember that there was a civil war in England led by the Dissenters, led by the Puritans, and Oliver Cromwell. Then, when the Dissenters won the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell became the Lord Protector, and King Charles I was beheaded. So this sermon was preached on the anniversary of that execution, at a time when the Church of England again was threatening. He preached a sermon called A Discourse Concerning Unlimited Submission. All right, so remember that title, A Discourse Concerning Unlimited Submission. Mayhew was a Congregationalist. He preached against a different king, but the same religion, similar message, a revolution against the monarchy and the state-supported religion. The text was Romans 13, 1 through 6. Let me read that to you. Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resists the power resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Now, this text seems to me to be an unusual choice to preach in support of a revolution. But remember the title, A Discourse Against Unlimited Submission. And Mayhew concluded his sermon that this law laid down by Paul is binding only insofar as government honors its moral and religious obligations. When government fails to honor that obligation or contract, then the duty of submission is likewise nullified. In other words, submission is not unlimited. Okay? So this was Jonathan Mayhew's sermon against the oppression of the Church of England and against the oppression of the English monarchy at the time. Now, 26 years later, John Witherspoon preaches a sermon called The Dominion of Providence Over the Passions of Men. And this is in 1776, so this is in the midst of the Revolutionary War. Witherspoon, by the way, was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, okay, and was the chaplain of that Congress. He declared without hesitation that the cause in which America is now in arms is the cause of justice, of liberty, and of human nature. All right, so we had just two examples here of preachers that are preaching for American independence. Now, not all preachers were for the American independence. Jonathan Boucher is one example of one who is not. But here's what's interesting about preaching during the colonial era. Support for and opposition to the revolution was preached from the pulpits. Here's some interesting statistics. Over the span of the colonial period, American ministers preached 8 million sermons. Each one lasted an hour to an hour and a half. The average 70-year-old colonial churchgoer would have listened to 7,000 sermons, totaling 10,000 hours. That's the equivalent of 10 separate undergraduate degrees. All right. So this tells you the influence of the church over those who lived in the colonies in the latter part of the 18th century. This is how important it was. At the bottom of the original Declaration of Independence, the Continental Congress wrote instructions for the Declaration to be delivered to parish ministers, and they were directed to read it to their congregations at the end of the services on the first Lord's Day after receiving it. The reason is that was the way that the Continental Congress could communicate to the citizens of the colonies, was to communicate to them through the churches. Which shows you how important the churches were during this period of time. Okay. Any questions or comments? All right, let's talk about the federal Constitution. This is after after America won independence. 1787, the basic Constitution was published for ratification, and it intentionally said little about religion because they did not want government to interfere. The only article that speaks of religion is Article 6, no religious test for public office. So this is interesting this year, isn't it? When we have a Mormon running for president, and we are constantly being reminded that there's no religious test for public office, so that there's no constitutional objection to a Mormon being president. The last time that was invoked to this extent was in 1960, when John F. Kennedy was running for president as a Catholic, and there were those who warned that if a Catholic became president, that the Pope would have too much influence over America. And of course, John F. Kennedy had to argue against that, and obviously was elected. But this is the only article in the Constitution that discusses religion. And so Baptists were opposed. They wanted an amendment with a specific statement about religious freedom. And remember, this has always been a hallmark of the Baptist faith. Religious freedom for all, not just for themselves. The Congregationalists wanted religious freedom for themselves, freedom for the Church of England. But they didn't want religious freedom for anyone else. The Baptists said every person has a right to religious freedom. And that's what Thomas Helwig said, whether they are Jew or Turk or heretic or anyone, that person should have religious freedom. So Baptists demanded an amendment with a specific statement about religious freedom. And they had the numbers for this. James Madison was nominated by Virginia to attend the Constitutional Congress to talk about amendments, to talk about the Bill of Rights. And the Baptists could have thrown their support to John Leland, and he could have been that representative. But he met with James Madison and worked out a compromise and said, we will support you if you will introduce a Bill of Rights, which he did. And so the First Amendment, passed in 1791, says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, will not abridge the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there is no establishment of any religious denomination. Notice that this is the purpose of this Bill of Rights. This is the purpose of this First Amendment. It is not an amendment so that the church will have no influence over the state. It is that the state may not establish any religion as the established denomination. And of course, Baptists would be very concerned about that, having experienced the persecution of the established church, Congregationalist in New England and Anglican in Virginia. And they call for the free exercise of religion. Well, the Constitution applied only to the federal government and not to the states. So Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts continue to tax support the Congregationalist churches. But New Hampshire and Connecticut, 1818, 1819, they finally disestablished their churches. Massachusetts was the last state to disestablish their church, and that was 1833. So that was very late after the Constitution, but finally they disestablished their church. So what about the separation of church and state? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or the prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We often today, those who support not freedom of religion, those who support freedom from religion, those who say that the Constitution is guaranteed that the church will have no influence over the state, the church shall have no voice in the public square, those who cry freedom from religion, talk about Jefferson's statement, the wall of separation between the church and state, that is absolutely essential in a free society. They fail to recognize the context of this statement. First of all, this idea of wall of separation did not originate with Thomas Jefferson. The idea originated with Roger Williams, the Baptist, who called for a wall of a hedge of separation from church and state. But the context for Jefferson's statement is that Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut were concerned about the establishment of the Congregationalist church. Christians in general were concerned about Jefferson because he was a deist and because he had spoken in support of the French Revolution. Of course, he was sympathetic to the French, having been an ambassador to France. He was aware of the situation there. But Danbury, the Danbury congregation, being in Connecticut, where the Congregationalist church was established, wrote to him. They complimented him on his election and asked him about church-state relations. I won't read the letter to you, but just accept my summary that was their concern. They were concerned about church-state relations in Connecticut. Thomas Jefferson's reply included his statement about the wall of separation. And he said, this is from his letter to the Danbury Baptists, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, and that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that he legitimate powers of government actions only and not opinion." Who believes that the legitimate powers of government reach to actions only and not opinions. "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declare that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties." Okay, so again, Jefferson was writing about the wall of separation between church and state from the perspective that the state shall not interfere with the church. He had no idea that the church would not have an influence over the state. But the Supreme Court has interpreted Jefferson's statement in exactly that way. All right. Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Here's a quote from the New York Times. "We start with the premise shared by every American who believes in the constitutional principles on which our country is founded, that religion has no proper place in American politics." Lawrence?
But do these people not even see that even the Constitution itself and that the very people who wrote the Constitution believe that the church had value? Like they don't, like the people who helped write the Constitution, the people who helped form the ideas, even though that they were deists, they saw the inherent value of the church itself, the morality, and they saw the benefit and all sorts of stuff. That if you didn't have all these radical Baptists and radical Presbyterians or whatever, then
then we wouldn't have
exactly.
religious liberty. Okay. So in other words, what you're asking is, why do these people calling for freedom from religion, why do they not recognize the value of religion, okay, in the founding of our nation, in the writing of the Constitution and the intent of the Founding Fathers? Well, I think what they would argue is that the Constitution being a living document, that means it is a changing document and should change to meet a changing society. And so they would argue that religion has less value. Some of them would even argue that it has no value. Some would argue that it has a negative value in our culture. because they see the church's opposition to homosexual marriage, what they call marriage equality. They see the church being opposed to abortion, what they call women's rights to a choice. So they see the church having a negative value, and therefore they are seeking to eliminate the church from the public square, and they've done this through limiting of public expressions like nativities on government property, prayer in public events, and mentioning of God in addresses at public school, and so on and so forth. So they're seeking to limit the expression, and they also are seeking to eliminate the influence of Christians in the public square. Joey?
I was just going to say, it looks like the pendulum's swinging to an atheist state church.
Well, all right, so what do you mean by an atheist state church?
It just looks like the state's religion is atheism. They're becoming to take out God and everything, meaning they're pushing their values and religious systems upon theists.
Right. Yes, many people see it that way, that what we have is that the state, by arguing against religious influence in America, has actually created a state religion of atheism, which pushes its own agenda on the nation through legislation, education, media, so on and so forth. Well, I do not disagree, but that certainly is a concern, and I think we see that. You just have to open up the newspaper, turn on the news to see this happening. All right, but still, at the same time, we have a civil religion in America. We see this developing in the aftermath of American independence, and we certainly have seen it through the centuries and decades since. I think we're seeing a diminishment of civil religion, but it still hasn't left yet. Civil religion is this natural religion, a public religion that is available by reason. It's not a religion of the heart. It's not a personal experience. It's not a divine revelation, but it's a reasonable religion that relates to our mission as a nation, and this bond at the beginning united the nation. This God-given vocation. We're going to talk in a little bit about the manifest destiny, and this idea that God has made manifest, or He has revealed the destiny of America is to go from one coast to the other coast, to take over this continent. Why? Because we have a mission to be the city upon a hill, so to speak, to teach democracy for the world. We're to be a light to the nations by our example, and also by attracting people to our nation. We're going to liberate the oppressed through military expansion and foreign missions. All right. Let me just talk a little bit more about civil religion, because it's going to be important in our understanding of American Christianity in the 19th century and even the 20th century. The idea of civil religion was actually first devised by a man named Robert Bella in 1967. So this is a relatively recent understanding of American history. But it says that civil religion existed alongside of and was rather clearly differentiated from the churches. But it is the state's use of consensus, religious sentiments, concepts, and symbols for the purposes of the state, to function as a social glue to bind people together and give them an overarching sense of spiritual unity. Okay, you perhaps can understand this if you remember from your study of the early church about Constantine. And he desired to use Christianity as a glue that would hold together the Roman Empire. Okay? And then Charles V, in his fight against Martin Luther, one of the reasons he objected so much to Luther's Reformation was that it divided the Holy Roman Empire at a time when he needed unity to defend against the Muslims that were threatening. All right, so in America, we don't have the union of church and state, so there is this promotion of civil religion that unites people across denominations because of its emphasis on a God-given call and mission of the United States. Okay, listen to this. This is kind of a list of descriptions of civil religion. It involves beliefs, but no formal creed. There are events that seem to reveal God's purposes. This author mentions the American Revolution and the Civil War. And when you look at the preaching related to those two, you certainly see how both invoked the name of God in support of their cause. There are prophets. He lists Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. There are sacred places such as shrines to Washington, Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, Bunker Hill, Gettysburg. These are shrines of the civil religion. There are sacred texts, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. There are ceremonies like Memorial Day, Independence Day, Veterans Day, the pageantry of presidential inaugurations. We have hymns, all right? God Bless America. You know, someone once told his son, they're singing the national anthem, when they're singing God Bless America, put your hand over your heart. God bless America, my country 'tis of thee. There are hymns, patriotic hymns. There are rituals, prayers at public events such as inaugurals. Even though we can't have them at football games, we can have them at inaugurals. The beginnings of sessions of Congress, and there are national days of prayer. Okay, so these are just the trappings of a civil religion. Presidents, in a sense, serve as prophets and priests of civil religion. Okay. They regularly invoke God in inaugural addresses. Almost every presentation to the nation concludes with God bless America. All right. So the president functions as the nation's principal preacher and chief pastor. All right, which is why at least for many in America, particularly the evangelicals, this presidential campaign has been unique because we're faced with a choice. Evangelicals see the sitting president as one who has opposed many of those values that we consider Christian and biblical. So it's difficult for us to support him, and yet on the other hand, we have the other candidate is a Mormon, and to vote for him raises what we consider to be a cult to a higher standard than we would want to give. And so if we consider the president to be the preacher and pastor and prophet and priest, well then this makes it difficult. This is why religion is so important in this particular election. Now, America's presidents usually avoid mentioning Jesus or Christian doctrines. They've minimized theological differences in order to maximize America's core values. All right, but scholars distinguish between priestly civil religion, which is a way of using the civil religion to inspire and to console. I think you consider George W. Bush following 9/11, and particularly the sermon that Billy Graham preached at the National Cathedral. That was bringing out the priestly function of civil religion. But then there's prophetic use of civil religion in times of war. God is on our side, or in ideas of welfare, that we're going to be prophetic. We're going to foretell the need for America to meet the needs of the poor. Okay, obviously, there's one party which is perceived by many to be that party who meets the needs of the poor. And so many Christians support that party, and justifiably so, because they feel that party meets biblical expectations. Okay, another group supports another party because they see some differing values as being important. But all this to say that this civil religion has been a part of American life from the very beginning. Okay, even today, even though our society is much more secularized than it ever has been, nonetheless we still see civil religion as an active part of our culture. Anyone have any questions or comments? Okay. All right. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, those who suffered most were, of course, the Anglicans, the Church of England. In fact, they changed their name to the Episcopal Church. All right? Why? Remember the word episcopus? Those of you who study Greek, that means overseer. It's translated bishop. And so Episcopal means to have bishops. And so that's where they come by that title, and they changed the name to the Episcopal Church. And then those who were the peace churches, those who were the pacifists, the Quakers, Mennonites, and Moravians, they were criticized because of their lack of involvement. The Congregationalists and Presbyterians were less affected, but they grew little. And boy, the Baptists and Methodists, they grew. Their churches grew until the Methodists around 1800 were the largest of the denominations. Soon after, the Baptists became the largest denomination. And by the mid-19th century, the largest denomination was the Catholic Church. Because of conversions? No, because of immigration from Europe. So by 1850, the Catholics outnumbered any other single Protestant denomination. Wow, that's a lot to cover. But it's an important period of time as we see the colonies, later the United States. We see them moving from established churches, which the union of church and state, which had been the pattern for centuries, going back to Constantine in 325. We see the union of church and state. It had always been the pattern. We see dissenters like Anabaptists in Europe in the 16th century calling for religious liberty. We see the Baptists in England calling for religious liberty. And finally, we see religious liberty in America. And it is an experiment. But it has worked for these many years. And Baptists played a big role in it. Okay? Well, as I said, we need to take a very quick break. I am going to start back at 3:40, whether you're here or not.